welcome back. You're in Track 2 now, or you're in Track 5, Session 2, rather. And just keep in mind, I know you'll kind of break for lunch after this. It's going to be a working lunch, as you know, so you'll go back into the larger room that you began the day in. So just keep that in mind. We've got those little tables you can put in front of you. I know it feels very college-y. But just to introduce myself again, I'm Sam Bumgarner with UNC Charlotte. We're glad to have you in our building today. And unfortunately for y'all who've been and seen me a couple times, you'll have to listen to my shameless plugs over and over again. But just keep in mind, we have lots of courses. Many offer PDU credits. They're all held in this building. Our newest that we're rolling out this fall are Lean Six Sigma certifications. We've got all of them: white, yellow, orange, green, black, and master black. They all carry PDUs. So if you are interested, I've got information out on the green table out here that I'll be sure to replenish if we start getting low. But please keep this in mind as you look to get your PDUs. This is a great opportunity in and of itself. But I'd like to quickly introduce our two speakers for this track. Brandon Conrad, who's a sales and marketing manager with Matchware, and he has a degree in economics and psychology from the University of Kansas. He's worked at Matchware since 2006 as a project manager, and his focus as he's been there has mainly been in mind mapping software and how it relates to project management, so it should be great. And Scott Sachs, also with us today, Associate Director and PMO at Loyola University in Maryland. He's the Associate Director of the Project Management Office in Technology Services at Loyola. He's been there since about 2004. He's a PMP and a certified risk management professional as well. So thank you both for being with us today, and I'll kind of come back in so you know kind of where your time needs to end. I'll stop back in, but thank you both. Thanks, everybody.
Well, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. All right, because I don't really like standing behind podiums that much with the mic. I like to kind of walk around. So kind of the, I guess, ground rules for the presentation really is that even though it looks like a formal PowerPoint, formal presentation, I like to do things a little informally. So if you guys have questions or something's not clear, feel free, blurt something out or raise your hand. I like to try to get as interactive as we can, even though this is kind of a not the best room for an interaction type thing. The other thing I want to tell you guys too is this is not a sales presentation. So Brandon here is from Matchware, and part of the presentation I'm going to talk about how we're using their software, but not from a sales perspective. We actually teamed up for the presentation because felt that it made things a little bit easier for you guys to see some of the stuff that I'm talking about. So what we'll do is kind of go through the presentation, and then at the end, Brandon will show a little bit more than about what I've talked about, just to give that visual of things. So there's our introduction. Samantha did a pretty good job. I guess the question that I would have for you guys, well, first, I'm from Loyola University, Maryland, out of Baltimore, Maryland, and we're higher education. Anybody else here in higher education? Okay, great. So that means I can say anything, and you guys will know if I'm telling the truth or not, right? Actually what I found is that it doesn't matter really the industry, we all face the same challenges. The only thing that's really different is the type of politics that go on. We still have it, it's just a little bit different than corporate or the public, private sector, all that. By I guess a raise of hands, how many people here have a formal change management or a project change management process at your companies? Oh, okay, great. We got look maybe more than half it looked like. So we have a formal change management process, of keeping the lights on and something has to change, you take the system down. And then we also have our formal project management change. So the whole presentation here I'm talking about is going to be our project change advisory board. So I might say project PCAB, or I might just say CAB, or I might just say change board, but we're talking just our projects, not pulling down a server and whatnot. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit just project management, change management, so that way we're all on the same kind of wavelength and talking about the same thing. We'll go on to kind of how we define it at the university within our department. We're a technology department, centralized technology. We kind of manage all the projects that come through that have a technology base, but we also branch out to the rest of the university and help them with their processes, methodologies, and whatnot. So we'll talk about our process, what constitutes the change, how it goes through, and then we'll talk about kind of the challenges that we had and what we did to really improve upon them, and then also kind of talk about where we are today. So why I threw that last slide in there is Brendan and I actually have done this presentation a few times, and I guess since 2000, maybe 13 or 14. So I know it's not that long ago, but I didn't want you guys to think that we're just bringing back some old stuff and things have changed. We're still talking about the old stuff, because that's not really the case. We're still doing a lot of it and more. So that's why I threw that slide in there. Hopefully today you'll kind of understand how one institution is using their change management. Maybe offer you guys something that maybe I haven't thought of from before, but then also maybe you offer me something that can help us. I don't claim that we're an expert on it. We haven't won any kind of change awards, anything like that. This is just what we do. So definitely interested in your feedback on it as well. And then again, just passing on that I guess moving that profession forward. So when we talk about project management, we talk about projects, that people use these projects because some kind of change is happening. The standard definition of a project, some kind of product service as a result. So something is changing. I used that little image there of your caterpillar turning into a butterfly, because what more of a project is that with a change? Now, what happens at that last picture that Brandon just brought up is, you have your caterpillar. They've created their chrysalis. They're hanging on a branch. Another caterpillar comes by and starts eating your leaf. That's probably not going to go as planned with you turning into a butterfly. So what do? Well, go to the next one. You have your plan B. So that's where we're talking about with change management. So instead of me telling you what I think change management is, I want to hear what you guys have to say. When we talk about change management, again, in terms of projects, what is that? Feel free to just yell it out. Scope change? Anything else?
Scope change, so you understand the impacts and make the best choices.
All right, understand the impacts and make the best choices. Great. Any others? Awareness. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm repeating just so everyone can hear also, but also for the microphone, because if somebody comes back, they let us know to repeat any questions or anything. Yeah, we can go to the next one. Exactly. That managing expectations, that awareness, so that when something is going to happen, people aren't caught off guard. I don't know about you. I've been in situations where we didn't manage change effectively, and the stakeholder was caught off guard and surprised by something, and it wasn't pretty. There was a lot of things that could have been avoided with communication. And what is it? 90% of our time we spend communicating. So it's really about that awareness and managing those expectations. It is also looking at that impact, that something changes. That doesn't mean it's changing just on that project. How many of you guys here have a project where your team is just working on that project and nothing else? Oh, do you really?
Sure.
Oh, I was going to say, that's awesome.
But it extends very far.
Oh, so big projects. Okay. Because yeah, that's kind of the nerdvana world, as I like to call it. That's really not the case. You know, you've got your project that you're working on, and then everything else. And if that project, something changes on it, it impacts everything else, other projects, your daily operational tasks that you have to do, and really just everything. So really looking at what that change is and how it's going to affect it, and then also approving and denying changes. You know, because that's also a big part of it. Being able to say no when a change comes in and saying, no, you can't do this, or saying no to another project or moving around dates and whatnot. So, you know, last line, not a question of when, or of if, but when, because change will happen. So, at Loyola, these are some of the things that we track with our project changes. So, change of schedule, change of scope, costs, resources, and we're working with you know, kind of that slow transition of trying to become more agile and bringing more agile in there. So when I say resources, I'm not talking about the lamps and stuff. Unfortunately, I was talking about people, and if you're anybody here agile, because we know we're not supposed to call people resources. So change of resources, change of leaderships, swim lane. So when we do our project scoring, we do an evaluation of the level of risk of that project failing. And based off of that, plus the cost and effort, we assign it a swim lane. And what that swim lane really tells you is how much level of project management is needed for that project. So we only have 4 swim lanes, A, B, C, and D, where A is your quick, easy, not much risk to it. And then your D is your full-blown, have to do everything, not by the book, because you do everything by like the PMI, you're probably going to be, you know, adding months and months and months to your project. When we talk about change of schedule, we're really talking about anything that's going to change the critical path or the end date of the project. Because if something's going to change on the project and it's not affecting that end date, I don't want to say who cares, but the customer or the stakeholder is not going to really care that much as long as they're getting it when they need it. So for our change process, usually what happens is we have a PPM tool, and the project managers have their schedules in there. They see a change that happens. They'll go and update that change if it's a schedule change, see kind of what that impact is, or if, you know, a leadership's change. Anybody have a leadership change on a project? Those are fun. We actually was working on a project where we had the director of HR was one of our key sponsors, and they ended up leaving the university. We were still working on the project. A new director was hired. Forgot to mention that they were a sponsor on the project, and brought them in, and they're hearing everything and seeing all the things that they're accountable for and all the things that they need to do. And they were like, whoa, what is this? I don't even know what we're doing here. And that was kind of a big wake-up call for us, because that's one of those things that happens. You're full-blown, you know, full speed ahead. You kind of forget sometimes of that stuff. So that was a kind of little wake-up call. So what happens is they have some sort of a change, and we had multiple forms. You had your change of schedule form, your change of scope form, your change of cost, all these things, which I'll talk about, I guess I can talk about now. That's a challenge, especially if you have project managers who don't have project manager in their title, who aren't, you know, professionally trained as project managers, who were kind of given, like, won an award and became a project manager, don't really understand which form to go to, and end up filling either the wrong one or having the same change and filling out a form 5 or 6 times. So that was a huge lesson learned for us with our change management process. So we get this form, and we like to say get these changes in 48 hours in advance. So, right there and then, you're probably shaking your head 48 hours in advance. Good luck. And it really was good luck. Because, that really doesn't happen. But the real reason why we wanted that time is because our person who was in charge of our change management process had to create these pre-meeting documents to send out to the rest of the CAB participants. These pre-meeting documents that had our agenda. It had all the different changes that were in there, and changes depending on the time of year or the time of month or whatever. It was anywhere between 10 and 20 changes on the projects. And then it also went through some of the any kind of portfolio updates and whatnot. And it's a lot of work. I don't know if anybody's sat and put together stuff for a big meeting. And I'll get into who's on our change advisory board, but let's just say they're usually higher up pay scales than we are. So it's a lot of work, and you want to make sure things are perfect. So this document then is sent out 48 hours in advance with the idea that everybody's rushing to look in and see what these changes are, so that when they get in this meeting, we know what we're talking about.
Hey, Scott.
Oh,
Question up there.
I was curious, in your agenda there, is it A, B, C, D swim lanes, or do you only do C and D, or do you have
It's a great question. Actually, we just do any of the changes, regardless of the swim lane. The only thing the swim lane would tell us is just how the project's actually managed. All of our projects, we require a schedule and a sign-off on the schedule and whatnot. But that's actually a really interesting thing that maybe we might want to think about that. See if our changes maybe can either be different based on your swim lane, or maybe we organize the meetings that way. But yeah, did you have a thought? Or?
Well, yeah, some simple changes, like when you do your assessments, depending on the amount of organization it impacts or other projects, today, as you quoted, it might be a sub-board, or maybe just a technical board versus a pure full CAB board.
I like that idea. And for the recording, and I'll just repeat, make sure I understood it, my active listening skills, right? Whenever our communication. So that if we have different levels of our changes based off our swim lanes, it could be sub-boards. So maybe a smaller change for a less riskier project with a swim lane A or B. We've got a different board versus the full-out board of higher level managers and whatnot. I like that. That's a great suggestion there. So we send that document out 48 hours in advance. This actually is an example. We're going to try to actually click on it and show. You might have to stay at it and just. This is part of our change of our presentation. We're kind of on the fly here. If you open up the PowerPoint and just double click it, not in presentation mode, it might open up.
This is the one, though, right?
It's not the minutes. Try this one. Not the one underneath that. Oh, that's the PowerPoint. No, that's the meeting one. So then, yeah, it must be the top one. Yep. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is an example of this pre-meeting documentation that's sent out. And again, that's why I wanted to tell you guys, because this was from 2013. So you'll see it shows the different projects that are going on and what the description of the change is. And then that's actually a hyperlink that links out to where one of the forms was, so you can actually see the change. We're using SharePoint, so that's where they would fill out these forms. You kind of just scroll through. Nothing There's nothing. We can get into some of the individual changes, but it's really not important. So, but yeah. So this is kind of the documentation that is sent out before the meeting.
That's for one meeting?
Yeah. Yes. And so the meetings usually, depending on the number of changes, scheduled for maybe an hour and a half. So very aggressive. Very, very aggressive. That might have also been showing a lot of, that might have been a heavier meeting, which we'll get into with some of our challenges as well. Any other questions? Okay. So what happens then is our change, person that had our change then wants to create the in-meeting documentation. So that's the pre-meeting. So now we have to kind of take that, turn it into a PowerPoint because you want to make it look pretty and kind of flow. So basically all that information translated to a PowerPoint. Sounds easy, but you see there's a lot of information in there, a lot of organization with like links and whatnot, and testing, especially sitting in these meetings. You want to make sure that things are working. So that takes up a lot of time as well. And then we can go on. This again is taking that document, and this is kind of what the PowerPoint then looks like. So it's okay. So that was actually just 12. Looked like I guess a lot more. So this is kind of that portfolio review where we talked about any projects that have completed, and then we go through the different change requests. So what we would do is actually have the project, click the URL, people would look at the change request, which obviously they looked at beforehand before the meeting, so they just had to, obviously, they just need to get a refresher. And so that's kind of what the in-meeting documentation is that we use. And so the actual meeting itself. So who's in our meeting? So we have our directors and our PMO. So our PMO consists of myself, our assistant director, and then we also have a part-time project manager / trainer. And then we have our directors, our CIO, and then anybody else that the directors wanted to bring in. So they might have known a change was coming in. They wanted to bring that project manager from their field. Or
so this constitutes a forum for the meeting. If one of those key groups isn't representing the meeting is pushed.
Great question, because we actually have one director who challenges the value of project management many times. I don't know if you guys have run into that as well, and doesn't always like to attend the meetings, regardless of if they're on the schedule or not. And our CIO, she understands that, but she just says keep moving forward. So it's really, if they choose not to attend, then, sorry, but
We institute that because too many times you go through, you have a big changes to go through, and there are a lot of small financial adjustments. The compilation at the end is fairly sizable. They're coming back, and you're going to do what you can.
Right, and that's actually a great point. So one of the, I don't know if this is an advantage or just different about with the way we run things in the department, and we're kind of shifting, changing this. So our budgets are basically created through a capital funding process, and then that's your set budget. If there is something that comes about and needs a lot of additional money, it'll go through this change process, but then a lot of those discussions actually happen outside of it, not actually through this, just because a lot of that funding doesn't really go through all tech services. We have to go through the finance office and all at the university. So it's kind of, they're not represented here. And we actually had talked about, do we bring outside people in? Do we bring the customers in to talk about our changes and have them fight it out too? And it's still on the table, but hasn't won yet.
So this is more like a technology change review board. And so like, I think you were mentioning your budget. You might have had stakeholders. Wouldn't you typically have had, they already had their sign off on their estimate? You know,
Yes.
I'm going to change this, it's going to cost $320,000. Make sure that you're aligned with them at some of their costs there before you ever get to this point.
I mean, on paper, yes. Does it always happen that way?
At least you had a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. You have to have the conversations. And we run our portfolios kind of split two ways. We call them university projects, internal projects. And really the only difference is where the projects originate. So an internal project, that's one that usually is a keeping the lights on type of thing, something new that is going to affect the university, but nobody else outside of technology is really going to care unless it's not working. A university project is somebody outside of tech services that has requested the project. Our CAD, we go over both, university and the internal. A lot of internal things that aren't like where decision makers don't need to be in the room for that from outside of tech services, we get a lot more accomplished in terms of changes versus some of those other big changes with the rest of the university. But yeah, no, it's a great question with that. We also have found that this meeting a lot of times is used as a direct communication with our CIO. That she actually, even if there aren't big changes going on, she still wants to get the changes in there because that kind of forces conversations to happen so that she knows what's going on, regardless if the right people are in there or not. So I mean, we've had the meetings where it's been half of the group, but we still had them, we still went through. And obviously, if there was a bigger change that we couldn't approve at that point because the right people weren't there, then we'd have to bring it back. We meet on a bi-monthly basis. I wouldn't say bi-weekly, that would be hell. But so it was a bi-monthly basis. So sometimes changes can't wait, at that time. So we sometimes have to have additional meetings or quick, like I want to call them like the water cooler type meetings, that informal thing that happens and just stuff gets done. And also, I guess what's not really mentioned there is we do go over the impacts. So as we're going through these different changes, usually, and it's not always the case, but usually there's been some sort of an assessment that's saying, here's something that's going to change and here's the other pieces that it's going to impact. So that way, when the CAB is looking at this change request, they're also seeing that assessment done. And that assessment done is based off of what the project manager thought the change was going to affect, and also folks in the PMO who kind of have that eye on the big picture of all the projects.
I'm just curious in your CAB meetings, what constitutes approval? Is it everybody approves it, or the fact that you can have missing members, is it really?
It's really the CIO. The CIO.
And it is in essence then a one-person CAB.
If you're looking at it like that, then yeah, I guess it is. And that's one of those things that we kind of argue back and forth. Usually what we try to do is get the consensus. Most of the time, it's usually agreed upon that this change has happened. But really, when you're getting the right people in the room, it's not necessarily, yes, that's approved, that's denied. It's more of, we understand we need to get this change moved through. Let's see how we can be creative and move other things around to make sure that it's less of an impact. And that's the hardest thing to do when you don't have everybody in the room. Because the approval, a lot of that's just based off of assessment and guesswork of what we think is going on. But yeah, that's definitely a great observation, great point. Not the first time we've heard it, especially from our project management challenger. So, but yes. So we have this meeting, and then what happens afterwards is one of the reasons why we bring folks from the PMO, like additional folks, is so that we can all be taking notes, because a lot's being said, a lot's happening in these meetings, and we just don't want to put that onus on just one person taking it, because they might have got something wrong and whatnot. So we have to kind of meet, compile, get all these minutes together. You have these changes documented, and then the project managers are notified, hey, your change was approved, denied. Most of our changes do get approved, and it's really that what happens is the stuff that gets affected is where the challenges really come in, and that's where a lot of the gentleness has to come into play and whatnot. And then we update our portfolio, and this all happens within 24 hours. Or at least we try to get it within 24 hours, because really by the next meeting, mindsets have already moved on. And so we just still want to keep them in the loop. I think the next one we have an example of this post-meeting documentation. That's the old one. And you'll notice that it's that, as Brandon's working on that, the post-meeting documentation is essentially the pre-meeting documentation, but then updated with a lot of the notes compiled, kind of making sense. Because I know if anybody's like me with their notes, a lot of times it's like scribble and jot it down. But that's kind of the basic of what it is. So you'll notice that most of them do get approved. But then I guess really, I don't know if there's an exact example, but those notes will describe the impact of something else and then what the action is to take care of that impact. Please.
So in your meeting itself, who represents the changes? The directors, or do you bring in the PMs? Or
No, so we have the person who runs the change management from the PMO, our assistant director. She runs it. She presents the changes. She's the one who is responsible for making sure that when a change goes through, it actually has all the information filled out in order to review it. And then she also does a lot of the assessment work of using our PPM tool and other our capacity planning and whatnot to kind of present the show. We even have what I guess we call the master Gantt, where it was essentially a Gantt chart of all the projects that you can actually open up and drill down so you can kind of see in real time, moving one, how it was going to affect the other. We were doing it in Microsoft Project, which is a big pain in the butt trying to bring in a whole bunch of projects together and show it. It was doable, but we found that it was a lot of work, especially to update it. And then later, our PPM tool actually implemented something very similar, so we were able to kind of use that, but we couldn't make changes in real time. But that was okay, because nobody really wanted to see that type of stuff. Nobody really likes looking at Gantt charts that much and whatnot, so we were okay with that. Do we have another question? Okay. So some of the issues that we had. So our time, I kind of alluded to this. So these actually are not exaggerated hours. I kind of took an average of ranges hours, but that pre-meeting documentation could take up to 3 hours to complete. And that in-meeting documentation, 2 hours, post-meeting, 3 hours. So that was about 8 hours worth of work for our assistant director to do just to get ready for this hour and a half meeting. I know that seems like a lot, but if any of you have ever put presentations together or compiled things like this, it does. It takes up a lot of time. We also, I laughed at that 4 to 8 hours because, the people won't get their changes in until they actually see they have the meeting on the calendar. Or we send that reminder out, hey, we're meeting for changes, get your changes in. So we don't get a lot in last minute, and then, it delays this, and we have to resend it and whatnot. And the last bullet on there, keeping track of meetings, so not following the agenda. Somebody said that great point when they looked at it, they said, that's all one meeting? Yeah, it's very hard, especially when people dive right down into the weeds, and they get in there and they start talking, and they forget all the other stuff that you have to talk about. That the idea, again on paper, is that they've read this stuff. They reviewed it, they know what's going on, but we all know that's that nirvana world. So the other thing too, we had all those multiple forms. I don't even know if that's on the next slide. I think the next slide is about just some of the changes we did. But we had all those multiple forms and people not knowing what to do. And also just SharePoint. Anybody uses SharePoint? Yeah. So, it could be great, but it's also very clunky. You want to do something very simple, you have to go roundabout in a whole bunch of funky ways, which causes some issues. So some of the things that we did is simplified it down to one form. We use Qualtrics right now. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Qualtrics. It's a survey tool, kind of like SurveyMonkey, if anybody's familiar with SurveyMonkey. And we're just basically creating an anonymous survey where people have all the changes there, and they can check, like types of changes, whether they realize it's that type of change or not. And then different questions will pop up based off of how they've selected those type of changes, and they go and they fill that out, and then that provides us kind of a nice format for the change, and we're able to kind of report on the, for metrics. If CIO wants to know how many schedule changes we had in the month, we're able to kind of show that also from just using the survey tool. And then here's where Brandon came in, that we weren't looking for a tool. I actually, it was a free PDU through somebody, might have been through PMI or projectmanagement.com, and doing a presentation on the software, and I'm like, cool, free PDU. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, wow, this seems like this tool was made for our process, because it can simplify everything that we're doing. And so, we went out, got some demos and all. There's other products on the market too. We didn't look, like I said, we weren't looking for one. It was just that we saw this, and price was right for us, and so we moved forward with it. So what that actually, using that tool did for us, if you want to click to the next one, it changed the timing. The timing alone was well worth it. So the way that the system works is you actually kind of create your agenda online on this online tool. And that agenda replaced our pre-meeting documentation because it had everything kind of in there. We were still able to kind of do a lot of the stuff, but using the tool, it just kind of fit right in, almost like a plug and play. We still had to do some of the work, but you see it took 30 minutes to about an hour, down from that 3 hours. The in-meeting documentation was 0 because everything we did for our pre-meeting is actually what we used for the meeting. And that's why, again, Brandon's here so he can show you, so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. But it actually came up on screen and has a cool interface where it goes from topic 1, topic 2, and whatnot. So kind of like your slides would work, but it's on the screen there. And then what's also great about it is you take your notes, and the way we run it is you take your notes right there in the software on each item or each level of agenda, and we do it on big screen projecting, so everyone actually sees what's being written. So if something's wrong or the person didn't get it right who's typing it in, we correct it right then and there. And so that actually helped with our post-meeting documentation, because it actually takes all that stuff, exports it out into a PDF, and then that's what's sent out to the folks. And you know what? When I say 15 minutes, we're just talking about cleaning up some spelling errors or punctuation and whatnot. So that total time really is about an hour, down from that 8 hours. So our assistant director, she was ecstatic when she saw this demo and kind of had that same mindset as me. Now, we do use the software for other meetings and whatnot, but our primarily use of it right now is for our change management process. The other thing that's great about it too is the last minute changes that come in, we pop them right in there, and that agenda is always the current agenda. We don't have to send something out because people have an account, they get the agenda, they can go in there and look at it. Again, hopefully they're looking at it before the meeting, not always. But the other thing too is keeping track of the meeting. Not only having that agenda always there on screen so people can see, you know, how much, I guess they can see all the stuff that's on the agenda, but it also allows us to track it and have times for it as well. So you see the time running out, it's a lot easier for the project manager to say, you know, hey, great conversation, guys, but we need to move on. You can see we have a whole lot of other stuff. Doesn't always work. You know, like I said, especially when you're talking with your directors or functional managers and trying to get them to stop talking. You know, sometimes it doesn't always work, but it helped out big time. So where we are today, we still use the tool heavily. A lot of people have commented before when they look at our changes is that, you know, if you guys were agile, you wouldn't be having all these changes, which is true. A lot of our changes do or would be solved if we were doing a more agile method. We're not there yet. We're just starting to look at agile stuff. It's a tough culture change. You know, I know they have the agile track here, but obviously you guys are in here, so you're not there. But, but I will tell you, you know, I guess the fundamentals of agile isn't the hard part. It's that culture change. Getting people to kind of give up that control as a project manager, putting the trust into your people, making sure the executives are asking the right questions, not the traditional waterfall type questions because they don't really apply. So that's what we're going through. And also, agile is not appropriate for every project. So we're exploring that. Right now we're using Kanban. Anybody familiar with Kanban? Okay, so we actually saw a presentation from a guy who works for Microsoft, and he wrote a book about using agile project management with Kanban. And so we've kind of been exploring using that on internal PMO projects, so that we don't want to just bring it out to somebody else because if it fails or we don't know what we're doing, you know, that's how we lose our credibility. But so that's what we're also kind of doing with our changes. We're still meeting bi-weekly. We're still doing a lot of the same stuff we're as described in the presentation. And what's also been kind of neat is people are seeing, you know, the tool and how it works really well for us. They want to try to use it for their needs and whatnot. When that's slotting out projects per person, it's actually something that we've been kind of doing where right now we're using Excel, but we're grabbing our data from our PPM tool, bringing it into Excel, showing almost like a Gantt chart per person of the different projects. So essentially, they can have maybe 2 or 3 slots of work that that they can take on of how many projects, and then we kind of schedule it out of, you know, like a Gantt chart of this project's going to be 3 months, then they're going to work on this project for 2 months and whatnot. And it's been really easy to bring that up in our change advisory board meetings, saying that, all right, this person here is going to be needed an extra 2 months. We can pull up this Excel spreadsheet and actually make those changes on the fly for that person. So it's not affecting the whole project. It's just taking an estimate that this person's working on this project for X amount of time. And so that's really been helpful for us as well, kind of a new addition to our advisory board meetings. So any other questions about, please?
I've been wondering about the time boxing in the meetings.
Yep.
Sometimes I'm kind of the time police in our meetings because I try to make sure that we get through everything. You can, with 12 things in an hour and a half, if it was an hour, that's 5 minutes. Obviously, you're going to burn 20 minutes on number one and 20 minutes on number two, and then everybody else gets shorted. And how do you time box and to make sure that the very low importance things, they do get 5 minutes, and the important things do get 20 minutes?
We need to get better at that, and that's why we take that example with the different swim lanes, maybe doing it separate like that. Because that is a big challenge. One of the great things about our assistant director is she is very, will put the foot down, very forthright, and cuts out a lot of the BS that happens in the meeting, which is why she's awesome. That's why, that's why she's been put in charge of this, because she can really, she's got a talent where she can push that through. But the other thing too is our meetings, our change meetings, is not just these changes, because we also do that portfolio review, which one of the things actually, I just got back from a conference and brought some great ideas to me about having a separate portfolio review meeting, because that's something different than the changes, which is what we weren't doing. So we're slowly going to see how we can phase that in and get all that. But that time boxing is very, very challenging. Most of the time what happens is if we know something specific is going to take a lot of time, we'll add the extra time in there. Otherwise, we kind of just divide equally through all the changes, knowing that if we're moving the things through, it's going to hopefully equal out at the end that one of them might have taken less time versus a longer time. But yeah, I don't have the perfect answer for that, because that's been our challenge. But what's nice about what we've done, and again, I'm not sales pitch to you guys, but what's nice about with the software is now we can focus on that as being our challenge versus everything else, those 8 hours it took to have this meeting. So that's actually kind of a different way to look at it, I guess. But that was a great question.
I have a question about your assessment tool. I'm managing the changes in our portfolio. It's 5 programs and 108 projects.
Okay.
So I can't know all the ins and outs of 108 projects. And my biggest heartburn, if you will, is getting enough information about the change to make an appropriate decision. And does your assessment do that?
So we're putting a lot of trust into the directors for that. We're putting the trust that the directors have talked to their people, that they know what's going on with their people, and they know what the people are working on. And it's a lot of trust, and we've been burned on it. It's very easy for me to blame other people and all this stuff, which I don't want to do. But it is hard, because what happens is we assume, you know what they say about assumptions, right? We assume that the directors know what they're talking about, that they know what's going on. A change happens, doesn't get communicated down to the people on the team, or it gets communicated to the project manager, not necessarily people doing the work, which is really where a lot of the stuff is being affected. And then that shows that, one, leadership is changing priorities constantly, not knowing why things are being changed. So what we try to do is, when a change comes through, we let the director or the functional managers know, hey, this change has come through on this project, and these are the people that are affected, so that it at least reduces some of that risk of being blindsided. Doesn't solve it all, but at least reduces it. So it's kind of, I guess there's a Japanese term called nemi washing. Anybody ever hear that? I don't know exactly what it means in Japanese, but it's essentially a way of getting consensus by going to small groups and discussing with the small groups, and then bringing it back to the big groups. So that's kind of essentially what we do. The change kind of comes in, and we just make sure enough people know about this, that it wasn't just somebody putting something in. We get complaints a lot that we go over the same stuff in multiple meetings. We look at that as a positive. Just because you've heard it in multiple meetings doesn't mean somebody else hasn't. But then also, if you've heard it in multiple meetings, that means you know it, right? Doesn't really work that way, but so we err on the side of over communication a lot of times. So, okay. Any others?
So you said your assistant director kind of is the one who manages the process. Does he or she have the authority to kick back requests saying, hey, this isn't telling us anything?
Yeah,
So she's doing some vetting before it even gets to the meeting.
Yeah, and you have to, because you don't want to just bring this up to the directors and say, hey, this change come in, they have a question on it, and we don't have the answer. That doesn't make the project manager look bad or unprepared. That's us. So, yeah, she has to and does it quite frequently.
You feel to your changes, but still flex the risk costs, categorizing, so you maybe hone in on the bigger, most important things.
So that's a great point. We talked about that. We've also talked about seeing what's driving like our strategic plan and what's driving our business, and seeing focusing the changes on those more strategic type projects. We're not there yet. We're still kind of talking about it.
Ranking and risk.
So we do that when we prioritize the projects.
Okay, sets triggers. So those triggers place changes in this system and so.
Not really. When we prioritize and score our projects, that just tells us what we're doing first and when. Like what should be our priority of doing it. When it comes to the changes, that priority kind of, I don't want to say goes out the window, but your project's underway. So all the projects that are underway are going through these types of changes. So we're not really looking at saying that your project has more of a priority over this one. But what we do look at is this change comes through and we know that this is a higher priority than the stuff being impacted. So we'll assess it in that.
Like an order entry review, like your system, if you have any project that has just a lot of changes, you trend those out and look for schedule issues, resource issues, technology issues. Does that system allow that type of analysis as well?
Not really. No, because a lot of it is just manual that we have to go through. So I want to give time just so Brenda can kind of just bring up everything so we can kind of just show you, just to kind of see kind of what we talked about with the meeting. But if you guys do have questions, both of us are going to be hanging out here.
Cool. So I know you guys were thinking Penn, Teller. I wasn't going to talk the whole time.
I don't know which one's which. He's got the more hair, so I guess, I don't know.
And on a side note, this might be one of our last presentations, because as I'm getting to know Scott, he's a diehard Raiders fan, and I'm a diehard Chiefs fan, so something's got to give sometime soon. But like Scott was saying, this is not a sales pitch. There's other options out there. This is a meeting management tool. There's Meeting King that's out there. There's Simplified Meetings. The reason he came from Baltimore and I came from Tampa is because you guys are obviously a finance community. And the one thing about Meeting Booster is that it can be hosted within your internal firewalls. So even though it's a cloud-based system, the information doesn't get out of your firewalls. So I'm going to go through a little bit what Scott was talking about and how the software for him saved a lot of time. This is the interface. Again, it's a web interface. It also sits on Outlook as well. So if you want to schedule through Outlook, if you want to synchronize this with Outlook, synchronize this with the tasks, it's all possible. So I'm just going to run you through how to make a quick meeting. Because as Scott was saying, one of the big issues was moving from the agenda, taking that information, running the meeting, and then taking that information and making the meeting minutes. So quickly, easily, obviously you see the title, the purpose, the start date. Again, this synchronizes with Outlook. You can add attendees, and you can also make a meeting series. The meeting series is really important in these types of tools because with Scott, the same 4 or 5 people are going to be at these meetings every single time. So if you're allocating tasks, either pre-meeting tasks or post-meeting tasks, all of them stay in one centralized area with those people. So for example, if you want to add another guest or another attendee, it's pretty easy. Just find someone that's in your group. And it's automatically going to check for conflicts within that person's schedule. You can always add a guest as well. So out of the change management, if you have a consultant coming in, the consultant doesn't have access to your firewalls, but they'll have access to the agenda and the meeting minutes afterwards. Also, you can always make approval of the agenda, approval of the meeting minutes, and you can always make a co-organizer. The co-organizer is important because they can actually add to the agenda. And let's say if Scott wasn't there, I can always start that meeting without Scott as well. So, creating the agenda. Just a second. Yeah, it'll adjust the time zone because it's integrated with Outlook. So when it sends out the meeting invite, it'll adjust accordingly. Yeah, the question for you guys in the back, does it adjust for time zone? And the answer is yes.
And when you say Outlook, does it do Outlook 365?
Gosh, any version of Outlook.
Any version.
Yeah, all the way back to, I think, even 2000. I tell people if you're using Office 2000, you shouldn't be looking for new software. So this is an example of what's one of Scott's agendas. Now, you can type this in manually. It's really simple. All you have to do is add a new topic, type it in, pretty simple. You can always use a past meeting as a template. You can always save templates within the software itself. Now, one of the pain points that Scott was talking about is hyperlinking over like SharePoint and keeping that link not only in the agenda, but in during the meeting and then post-meeting. With the tool, you can easily hyperlink over to SharePoint, over to internal servers for the documents. You can actually attach documents and upload them to the system, so Excel files, PDF, Word documents, whatever you want. There's that question, that time boxing. If you've ever created an agenda in like a Word document or Excel file, you're going, okay, 15 minutes here, 20 minutes here. You have no idea how to allocate that time. So within the tool, there's a time distributor. And it'll automatically allocate the time evenly through each one of the topics. And I'll show you when you actually start the meeting, it'll have a countdown for each one of the topics as well. So if you have a document that, that Scott had that had a ton of topics and you can't get an overview, it'll have a countdown for you so you can kind of stay on track with each topic. Also, you can show descriptions. So like here, Scott described this a little bit further. So when he sends out this agenda, they'll have a better understanding what each topic's about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. Now the cool part is I can actually distribute this agenda to all the attendees of the meeting. I'll show you what it looks like. Just select a style, pretty straightforward. So now this gets distributed to all the attendees. It has each topic, it's got the description, and it's also have the links as well. And of course, any change you can just redistribute this this agenda.
Is it distributed?
Yeah.
Is it distributed as like the body of the meeting invitation, or is it distributed like as a separate email? You know, here's your agenda referencing.
Yeah. So the question is, how is it distributed, and what does it look like? And I think one of the what you were getting at is if it's in an Outlook invitation, is it in the body of that invitation, or is it an attached document? Yeah, it's actually an attached document. It'll be PDF to each one of the individuals. Yeah.
Does it have areas to store like passwords, phone numbers, those things that might have to happen if you have some people who are virtual to the meeting?
As far as like
The connectivity information
Gotcha.
that they need to.
Yep. So the question is, if people are geographically dispersed, how do they get the invitation? How do they log in? This tool and pretty much all the other tools that I know of are synchronized with GoToMeeting, with WebEx, with links. So they'll pair with them and send out that meeting invitation as well. Yep. The other thing is, and Scott didn't mention it, but I think it's an important part here, is that you can send out pre-meeting tasks. So let's say we're going over a budget meeting and we needed Jim to update that budget file. So we can send him a task. That way he knows and he's prepared coming into the meeting. So he's not there scrambling, you know, on the, before the meeting or during the meeting trying to get that budget taken care of.
With reminders as well. So don't do the task if you get those annoying reminder emails.
Yep, so we just created the agenda. So what I'm going to do is just start the meeting. So now remember, was it 8 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah.
Yep. So instead of recreating that PDF that he had into a PowerPoint presentation, this just transitions right into the agenda. Obviously, you can take attendees, determine who's a note taker, who's a host. I'll explain why this is important a little bit later. Now, this is what the interface looks like when you're running a meeting. One thing that's important is your agenda's on the left-hand side. So in the case of Scott's situation where he had a PowerPoint presentation and maybe 20, 30, 40 PowerPoint or slides, it's really hard to get an overview at that point. So this gives you a simple overview of the agenda. And here's that kind of ticker for the time remaining. And you can do it on topic time if you wanted to, because that time distributor. So let's say we're starting the meeting and we're on this first topic. You can determine who's saying what. So let's say Adam says, this is, Brandon says, this wasn't. Boom. So what it's going to do is it's going to keep a ticker, almost like a thread of who's saying what. And one of the things that Scott was saying is that this can be up on the screen so everybody can see, which would be nice because if a note is being taken wrong, it's easily adjusted or easily changed. It also can be hidden if you want some person just taking the notes itself. Now, what's even more important is that you can have a conclusion statement. So save. So this conclusion statement is really important because if we're having meetings that are 2, 3, 4 hours long, the minutes are going to be pages on pages on pages. And what the conclusion statement allows you to do is just filter on the conclusion. So let's say Project X, this was the result. So when I get the meeting minutes, I can just see the conclusion statements and not all the discussion if I don't want to. Again, you can assign tasks. There's voting tools. So if you have more of a democracy and less of a dictatorship, then you've got tools that you can have votes on what the changes should be, and those will show up in the minutes as well. And again, if we don't get to every single topic, we can go to park topics as well. And then these park topics will be available when you make your next agenda. Kind of pause there. Any questions so far? You did pretty good here.
Is voting done by the person themselves, or is it just by the document?
It's by everybody, and it can be anonymous, or you can see who's voting. Yeah.
So like sometimes, I don't know, in our meetings, everyone brings some kind of device. Because they're taking notes, not because they're looking at other stuff. But we're not doing the vote, but like you could have everybody logged in and then they kind of do the vote, just like in like a closed meeting.
And you also like check yourself for attendance, like if I join late, I can.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's just an example of the voting tool. So if everybody's logged in, you can have it anonymous, or you can just have a show of hands. And then once you finish, it'll show up within the notes section, and then when I convert this over to the meeting minutes, it'll show in the meeting minutes as well. Another question? show you a couple more things here. All right. So let's say we stop the meeting. In meeting, great meeting. Now, this was the other pain point with Scott's process is that, okay, now we have to take this PowerPoint and then convert it over to the meeting minutes. What Meeting Booster just did was converted everything over to the meeting minutes for you. So as I scroll down, it tells kind of who does what. Here's that vote that took place, and of course the conclusion statement as well. So the meeting minutes, you can edit up to 2 weeks afterwards. So like what Scott was saying, 15 minutes to do the meeting minutes. I know my typing and shorthand's horrible, so I always have to go back and kind of adjust it so people can read it. And then, of course, you distribute the meeting minutes. And,
Just the conclusion.
oh, yep. Yeah. Here's what I was talking about, the filter just on the conclusion statement, so you can see what was decided on each one of the changes. And again, you can distribute the minutes to all the attendees, and it's going to show up as a PDF form. And here's one of the really cool things. Not only does it generate these meeting minutes, it auto-archives all the meeting minutes for you. So I'll give you kind of a funny story. So Matchware, the company, they've been around 20 years or so, or 21 years now, because on our 20th anniversary, all the management team decided to go to Vegas to have meetings. Great idea. But we were also working and doing the meetings at the same time. Well, the problem is when we got back, we started having the follow-up meetings on what do we decide here, what do we decide here. And of course, everybody's a little fuzzy. So we're trying to compile notes and trying to figure out what's going on. But with this meeting management, all you have to do is, let's say we talked about implementing like a CRM system. And because all these meeting minutes are archived, all I have to do is type in CRM. And it's going to pull up every meeting minute that the CRM was talked about. So I can filter on that date and say, I just want to merge, these different meetings. Export selections, and then it merges all those meetings where the topics about CRM were spoken about. So then it gives us that nice overview, especially if someone's missed a meeting. Here it is. Especially if someone's missed a meeting, or like in our case, if you're going to Vegas and having a good time, or New Orleans. And there's that document, everything that was talked about CRM. Now, one last thing I want to kind of mention. There's a whole analytics side of this software as well. So when you're taking attendance and when you're sending out those tasks, it's going to ask you if Steve or John was prepared. The reason for that is because it'll actually start tracking, okay, how often is Steve in these meetings? What's that costing the company? Is he prepared? So there's a whole analytics to decide to who's attending and what you're getting out of and how much the meetings are costing for the company. So that gives you just kind of a brief overview. And again, just to kind of recap with Scott's situation, just saving the time from creating the agenda to moving it to the actual meeting and then auto-generating the meeting minutes was where the real value that Loyola found. So before I take any questions, if you're interested in a free demo, come see me afterwards, or free demo. I'll give you my contact information, send you a link, and you can kind of play around, test the software, see if you'd like it. I'll open it up to, we still have some time for questions. Questions? Yeah.
If you're using this, does everyone else have to have the software also? Another location, when they're participating in their meeting, they also have to have it, or you're the only person?
It depends. The short answer is no. If you want to be able to be involved in the meeting series, be able to be involved in creating agendas and in the task system, you're going to need a login to the information. If you're running this in parallel with like GoToMeeting, then or WebEx, probably a little bit more popular here, then you just send the WebEx and people can see your screen. But if they're actually running the meetings or developing the meetings, they'd want a login.
And for our meetings, we don't have everybody that attends, not just Change Advisor, but other times we use it. Not everyone has a login, but they'll still get the email, the notes, or the agenda.
Yeah, if you have a guest and you type in a guest, they'll still get the agenda sent out to them. They'll still get the meeting minutes sent out to them. So you can have guest accounts. Yep.
Scott, so have you seen the use of this tool maybe increase adherence or participation, or I mean, you can fill the wall of shame out of who doesn't attend or no attend.
Yeah, I mean, well, the other thing too, which is we don't quite use it just because we got focused on baby steps and a lot of things. But the analytics side of it tells you, who's in all the meetings. So if you want to see, one, even what the cost is for this meeting, if you're, doing those numbers. But also at the end of it, they do an anonymous survey out to the participants, saying, hey, how did the person running the meeting do? How did this other participant do? And you can get kind of rated on that, and you can come up with different questions. And it actually, it's almost like that 360 in a way, where you get, that observation from other people. When we're having meetings, there's going to be 5 people in the meeting. It doesn't always work that well to have a survey because you can kind of figure that stuff out. So that's one of the reasons why we're not using it yet, because of that. But I would say that I don't know if it's increased participation, but it's definitely brought credibility to us because we get through this stuff and they're like, wow, you actually got through that. I didn't think you'd get through all that with the help from using the tool. So we never really did any kind of metrics to see what it was like beforehand versus now. So that's why I say I can't really say it included an increase in participation, but I know that people just have been impressed, and maybe it's because we're the certified project managers and we know how to run a meeting versus somebody who doesn't. Maybe that's what it is, but I think it's kind of a combination of it all.
I'm sure that antagonistic director would be very happy to see his name not up there all along.
Yeah, so that's probably why he doesn't call me. That's for a separate track in presentation.
Cool. No more questions. We'll be up here if you have questions afterwards. Otherwise, we'll let you out a couple minutes early. Thank you guys.